Hey everybody, it's Anna and welcome back to my booktube channel. Today we are going to be talking about the books that have stuck with me so far in the year 2025. At the time of filming this video, I have finished reading 77 books, which is quite a few, and in what I think might be a first since I started making the Books That Stuck With Me series. My hit rate on quality books that have stuck with me, like the ratio of quality to quantity, is incredible because I have 19 books to talk about in this video. So we are going to dispense with any preamble here and just get a move on because I don't want this video to be ridiculously long and I want to be able to talk about the books. So 19 out of the 77 books stuck with me. 8 of these are fiction, 2 are graphic novels, and 9 are nonfiction. This is just how I have arbitrarily decided to break it up. So without further ado, and in no particular order, I guess we'll begin with a couple of the books that I got out of the library, so I don't have them to hold up. First was Murder in the Dressing Room by Holly Stars. This was a drag queen mystery that was written by an actual drag queen in the UK, and it follows the adventures of this non-binary queen whose drag mother is tragically murdered in the dressing room of the beloved drag club, and it is up to her to solve the case. I really liked this book. I hope that the author writes more, and I believe there is a second book in the works. I will be picking that up as soon as it comes out. Next we had Mrs. Caliban by Rachel Ingalls. That was actually a recommendation from Jen Campbell. It's a very slight novella that I believe came out in the 1970s, and if you have seen The Shape of Water, this novella predates that in terms of a lot of the exploration of female desire. There is a literal mysterious fishman who comes out of the ocean into this woman's life, and she is completely infatuated with him, and it is kind of the story of their relationship. I loved the way that so many of the metaphors in this book interrogated sexual desire and disability. There's definitely some disability metaphor going on in this story. Definitely want to read that again. Milkman by Anna Burns. This was a novel that was a very challenging read for me. It took me a long time to get through. It takes place in an unnamed city in Northern Ireland during the Troubles, in the 1970s, 80s roughly, and we follow middle sister who is this sort of bookish girl that is trying to stay a little bit out of the way and out of any of the sectarian conflicts that are going on, and then eventually she starts becoming this object of fascination and desire for Milkman, a much older man who is basically stalking her in the name of some of this political, sectarian agenda that he's working on. It is really a story about her figuring out who she is, what community means to her, what it means to grow up in an environment that is completely characterized by surveillance and paranoia. I adored this book. It was definitely worth the challenge in terms of reading it, and I will be rereading it at some point. Brittle Joints by Maria Sweeney is one of the graphic novels that I read. This one is a memoir of the artist's experience growing up with a congenital disability, but also growing into her own as an artist. I absolutely love the paneling and the sort of dreamy watercolors of a lot of the spreads in this book. I got it as a library book. It's a small press book, and I actually will probably be purchasing a copy of it myself because it's so beautiful. I just really want to have it on my shelves. I read that for the Disability Readathon this year, by the way, and the next book I also read for the Disability Readathon, which was Loving Our Own Bones, Disability Wisdom and the Spiritual Subversiveness of Knowing Ourselves Whole by Julia Watts-Belser. I was actually lucky enough to meet her because I didn't realize that we run in some of the same circles, so that was pretty cool. But this is basically what the subtitle says it is. She is a professor and a rabbi who intersperses stories of her own life coming into her disabled identity with a lot of her religious readings of different stories from the Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Bible, one of the key Jewish holy texts. It was really well written. It was absolutely just a treat to read. Okay, so that's all the books that were library books that I don't have copies to hold up. Now let's get into the rest of them. We have Brother Cadfael's Penance by Ellis Peters, which is the 20th and final of the Brother Cadfael Chronicles. This definitely stuck with me because, again, if you have been watching my channel, you will know that I have spent the last several years reading the entire Cadfael series from start to finish. So not only will this stick with me because it was a monumental achievement to complete reading that entire series, this was actually an incredibly good installment in the series and a very satisfying conclusion to this character's story. Okay, we also have Half Arse Human, How to Live Better Without Burning Out by Lena Norms. Lena is a fellow booktuber who makes a lot of videos about books and sustainability, environmentalism, and basically just like how to try and be a better person. This is basically my kind of self-help book, I guess, for lack of a better word, because the premise of this book is just that it is way better to half-arse trying to do something to make the world a better place or to improve a situation than it is to whole arse and burn out or give no arse and just not care and not try at all. This was a funny book. I really enjoyed reading it. I enjoyed annotating little bits and pieces of it and writing notes in the margins. This is definitely a book that reminds you that the opposite of despair is not hope, it's action. And this is a book that really encourages you to take action if you see problems in the world that you would like to do something about. This one will probably come as no surprise to anyone on BookTube that I have James by Percival Everett on this list. This is a book that has taken both the readerly and critical world by storm, and it is the telling of the character Jim from Huckleberry Finn, or as he is called in this book, James. It is him telling his own story and his perspective on the events that happen in that classic American novel. I can't really say anything about this book that hasn't already been said by other people, but it is incredible. It is an amazing addition to the American literary canon and is very much in conversation with not just Mark Twain's classic, but with the American literary canon at large. This book was very, very good. I have recommended it and gifted it a lot since reading it. Next, we have Small Things Like These, which is a novella by Claire Keegan. This was actually made into a movie, which I have not seen, but which looks really interesting, and this was shortlisted for the Booker Prize in 2022. This is a story of this man, Bill Furlong, who lives in this small Irish village, and this relationship that he has with a young, unwed girl who has become pregnant. Relationship meaning more like a fatherly relationship. I don't want to give you the wrong impression of this, but this was an incredible book. It actually did make me tear up at the end reading it. Very slight, could read it in one sitting, but definitely will revisit. Here's our second graphic novel, which is Family Style, Memories of an American from Vietnam by Tien Pham. This apparently won an Excellence in Young Adult Nonfiction, or it was a finalist from YALSA, which is the American Library Association's young adult governing body. I loved this book. It is a memoir in food that is about the author and his family escaping Vietnam at the end of the Vietnam War, coming to America, the process of becoming acculturated to a place whose language you don't speak, whose food you don't eat, where you have come through this really difficult, unimaginable circumstance and trying to start over completely and make your life in a new place. I really, really loved this book. It also made me very hungry while reading it, which is always a good sign when the book is about food. Next is The Bog Wife by Kay Chronister. This is, like Family Style, a book that I was gifted as a Christmas present by my husband. This is the story of a family that has been caretakers of this bog for generations, and there's this family lore that when the time comes for the patriarch of the family to die, he has to be buried alive in a bog, and the bog will send a bog wife, like a woman that just comes up out of the bog. She is then to marry the next oldest man in the family, thereby becoming the new patriarch and matriarch. So this is the story of how that all goes terribly wrong and how what this entire group of siblings expects will happen does not happen. This is an amazing sort of interrogation of family stories and the way that particularly white families in America will talk about their own history and how we might inflate our own sense of the past's grandeur. and how that intersects with the reality of the situation and what's really going on. Really creepy and atmospheric. I loved it. Next was Black Pill, How I Witnessed the Darkest Corners of the Internet Come to Life, Poison Society, and Capture American Politics by Elle Reeve. This is another one where the subtitle basically tells you what this is all about. Elle Reeve is a journalist with Vice who did a lot of coverage of the Unite the Right rally at Charlottesville that sadly led to the death of a woman who was protesting the far-right people that were marching in the streets. This is kind of a how did we get here story, and while as somebody who is pretty online, I was like aware of a decent amount of the online radicalization that goes on, there was so much research in here that put this in context that was very helpful for me to read as a way of understanding kind of a crisis that we have going on, particularly in American masculinity, but because the internet is global, it is a worldwide phenomenon. Really tough read, but definitely worth it. We have another disability readathon book here, or just after. This is Owning It, Our Disabled Childhoods in Our Own Words. It's an anthology edited by Jen Campbell, James and Lucy Catchpole, and illustrated by Sophie Camlish. This is a lot of different stories, which, as I said in my wrap-up for this, reads like a who's who of disability advocates, artists, writers, etc. that you may know from the internet. And this is them telling stories about their childhoods and reflecting on what it was like to grow up as a disabled child with the context that they now have as adults. Next is The Serviceberry, Abundance and Reciprocity in the Natural World by Robin Wall Kimmerer. This is a very slight book that was originally published as an essay in a magazine, and it is all about looking at the economy that we have set up in this world through the lens of biology and what it would look like if instead of an economy that was completely focused on scarcity and competition, we instead built an economy more similar to the Serviceberry economy, which she says is an economy based off of abundance, gift-giving, interdependence, and reciprocity. Exceptionally well written. While this book was not explicitly about disability justice, I also found that a lot of her thesis resonated very much with disability justice teachings. So kind of an unlikely disability read if you have it. Let me see. We also have Patriot by Alexei Navalny. This is a memoir by the man who was the leader of the democratic opposition to Vladimir Putin's regime in Russia. He wrote most of this book while he was actually in prison for trumped-up charges that were related to him challenging Putin's corruption, and unfortunately he was killed in prison by the Russian regime. So that definitely does color your reading of this book. Since I have talked about this previously on my BookTube channel, there have been some folks that have pointed out different critiques of this book and how the sort of reality of Alexei Navalny, the person, was messier than this book or his portrayal and adulation in the West would have you believe. So figured that was worth mentioning, but regardless, I still find this to be a very powerful expression of the human desire for freedom and democracy, even under very adverse circumstances. Okay, this next one was another Christmas present from Sean, and that is Women's Work, The First 20,000 Years by Elizabeth Wayland Barber. This is the new edition that I believe came out in 2023? No, sorry, 2024. So the book was originally published in 1994, and it was this landmark work on the history of textiles and fashion and so-called women's work, and how it really revolutionized the way that we conceive of tools, technology, archaeology, human history, because this author was the first person to really take a comprehensive look at the history of textiles as something very serious that could inform us a lot about our history as a species. Absolutely fantastic read. I loved this. I have listened to a ton of podcast episodes where the author is interviewed and talks about how she even got into this. So if the history of human culture or the history of why we even wear clothes at all is important or interesting to you, please pick up this book. It's very well written. You will enjoy it, I think. Next, we have The Message by Ta-Nehisi Coates. This is a book that is like an interlinking triptych of essays that are about his travels in Africa, North Carolina, and Palestine. And really, the thesis of this book is about the importance of journalism as a method for truth-telling and storytelling that is increasingly more vital as it is under attack in our world today. This was a powerful essay that made the case for the value of writing, for the value of investigation, and for the value of, approaching the kinds of things that we read and experience with criticism. I feel like we don't get, I don't think we get enough good works of criticism out there anymore. This is definitely one of them. Okay, we also have Everything is Tuberculosis, The History and Persistence of Our Deadliest Infection by John Green. This is, bar none, the best public health book I have ever read, in that it charts the history and evolution of the disease tuberculosis, which is one of the most ancient diseases to ever affect humans, and which has killed more members of our species than many other pandemics combined that we think of as being far deadlier than tuberculosis. But this book really makes the case for how public health measures really go a long way towards being able to cure and eradicate disease. And so by focusing on this one disease in particular, which John Green and his brother Hank have a very vested interest in, partially because they have spent a lot of their money and influence to bring treatment for this deadly disease to places around the world where it's not easily accessible or affordable to people. But it takes this public health lens and explains the importance of social governmental policies and things like that for us to be able to live in a more just and equitable world. And to me, that is a big part of what public health is really all about. And finally, we have Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. This is one of the books that I had picked out when we did my 30th birthday bookshop tour of the Pacific Northwest last year. Wait, was that last year? How old am I? Yes, it was last year. It was 2024. Anyway, this is the story of some people that you may have heard of, Anne Hathaway and Hamnet Judith Shakespeare, and it's really a book that is about the family, whereas the character of William Shakespeare is very much off to the side. It's really the story of Agnes, which is what Anne Hathaway is called in this book, her experience as a mother and what happens when the plague comes to the village where she and her family live. If you know anything about Shakespeare's life, he did lose a son named Hamnet to the plague. That affected him very deeply, but this is also looking at who else that affected, the love story, and then the sort of falling out between Agnes and Will, and it is so well written. It is very sad though. It definitely made me a bit teary-eyed as I read it, but definitely worth the read. So, those are all of the books that have stuck with me so far in 2025. Let me know if you've read any of these or if you had a favorite book that you would really like to recommend and send my way. We've still got 6 months in the rest of the year. That's plenty of time to keep all of the quality reads coming. As always, thank you all so much for watching this, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!